Good evening, everybody. I'm Rick Kwiatkowski. I chose option B for my final project, and I'm going to be looking at GM's parts distribution management. Now, a little bit of background on GM. As you all know, they went through bankruptcy back in the late 2000s, and they emerged trying to adopt a more sleek and efficient business model. Now, one of the ways that they're trying to do that is by employing after-sales customer care centers. So, essentially, these centers act at least for receiving, like an assembly plant would. Every piece of material that would normally flow through the supply chain to an assembly plant flows to these centers as well. So they have 20 of these around the country. Many of them are attached to existing manufacturing plants. For example, the one in Flint, Michigan is attached to a sheet metal facility and a powertrain facility, if I'm not mistaken. So the cost of transportation of these products is minimal to none. And now there are some, for example, there's one out in California. I don't believe there's any GM manufacturing facilities out in California, so there is some transportation cost associated with that. Now, the design of this parts distribution network, I think, fits most closely into the distributor storage with carrier delivery model from Module 11. And a brief description of this model from the article by Sunil Chopra states that under this option, inventory is not held by manufacturers at the factories, but held by distributors and retailers in intermediate warehouses. And package carriers are used to transport products from the intermediate location to the final customer. So the distribution center layout we're going to talk about next. We're going to look at how this fits into the four primary functions of any distribution facility. And the four primary functions are accumulation, sortation, allocation, and assortment. The accumulation process takes place when inventory is received from both GM manufacturing plants and from select suppliers. So there are some suppliers that ship directly to these parts distribution centers. For example, Johnson Controls, if they were making a rheostat for an air conditioning unit, they wouldn't ship it to a GM manufacturing plant. There would be no point because it's a rheostat. There's nothing to work on. So they're shipping this pre-made product to both assembly plants and to parts distribution facilities. Sortation allows associates to find items for distribution quickly and without confusion. For example, if a section of warehouse is divided, each section of warehouse is divided up in a style reminiscent of a large hardware store like Lowe's or Home Depot. The allocation process would be an associate matching what is available in the inventory to an order. A way that GM has improved this over the years is adapting a new automated ordering system, which I think is fairly recent, to make this process more efficient. So instead of somebody having to manually make orders, the process is becoming more automated based on the need of a authorized dealer or mechanic. And then there's assortment, or assembling an order, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that. There's a really good article which I recommend from the consulting firm Carlisle and Company. Their CEO, David Carlisle, wrote, "If you walk through a GM parts warehouse and pretend that you know absolutely nothing about parts warehouses, you'd swear you're in a state-of-the-art assembly plant. Material flows into this plant at a near just-in-time rate, and the material is processed and staged or binned. And ultimately, the material is assembled into custom orders and shipped out to dealers, just like an assembly plant." So in essence, what GM did was adopt the methods of one of their chief competitors, Toyota, who's been doing this for years, in order to make this process more efficient. Toyota has the vertical method of picking on a parts aisle. So the old method, what GM would do, an associate would go from one end of the aisle to the other and pick the parts that they need, and then go back the other way and pick the parts that they need on the lower shelf, and then so on and so forth. That was called the typewriter method. The new picking method is referred to as vertical picking. So what you're doing is you're shuffling through the aisle. You're shuffling down the aisle, and you're going top to bottom on the bins that you need to pick from. And that's actually saved, I believe, an average of they said 1,000 steps per worker per shift. which has dramatically cut costs. So this fits into their inventory management philosophy. GM currently holds $10.7 billion of inventory. Now, somebody who's an accounting major is probably screaming at me that inventory on a balance sheet is assets. The way that I interpreted this data is that they're trying to keep their inventory costs low, and they are the second lowest among their three chief competitors, Ford, Toyota, and Fiat Chrysler, for 2010 inventory in billions. So they have $10.7 billion of inventory. Ford has 10.6. I think Toyota has about $21.7 billion, and Chrysler has $15.5 billion of inventory. So if their methodology is to improve the efficiency process, it seems to be translating to how much they have in inventory. In addition, it looks like their inventory levels in billions of dollars has been dropping over the last 3 years, while those three aforementioned chief competitors' levels are going up. So some challenges that they're going to face. Everybody who works for GM on the labor side is part of the UAW, the United Auto Workers Union, and those people have a tendency to create work stoppages from time to time. So that's a major issue and could be a blow to efficiency. So they definitely want to keep those laborers happy in order to keep trucking along. Another thing that they got to look at is just continually improving their forecasting methods to make sure that they're producing the right parts and the right vehicles for the economic climate. If you have $5 gas prices, you don't want to be producing too many trucks or SUVs. And how can the system improve? You just focus on network optimization. We live in a digital age, so I focus on the omni-channel experience, where somebody can order 24/7. From their smartphone. A dealer or mechanic can do that, and I think they've adapted this pretty well. They lead the industry in productivity, and each one of these distribution centers is a 24-hour operation. All right, so that's pretty much it. Hopefully I didn't ramble too much. I appreciate your time. Thank you very much.